Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our event welcoming this quarter's Pritzker Fellows at the Institute of Politics. My name is Hugo Barrion. I'm a fourth-year student from West Hartford, Connecticut, studying public policy, and I'm also an intern for the Fellows Program here at the IOP. We're very happy to introduce you all to our fellows who will be hosting seminars and office hours throughout the quarter for students. First, we have Tim Alberta, Chief Political Correspondent for Politico. He has covered topics such as the Trump presidency, Capitol Hill, the ideological warfare between and within the two parties, demographic change in America, and the evolving role of money in elections, all of which are incredibly pertinent given the political moment. Tim Alberta's seminars will be on Wednesdays from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Next, we welcome Senator Heidi Heitkamp, former Democratic senator from North Dakota and co-founder of the One Country Project. Senator Heitkamp was elected in 2013 as the first female US senator from North Dakota, and during her 6 years in Congress, focused on working across the aisle to deliver solutions to the people of her state. Senator Heitkamp seminars will be on Thursdays from 12 to 1 p.m. We're also excited to welcome Congressman Will Hurd, former cybersecurity executive, undercover officer in the CIA, and the Republican congressman for the state of Texas. With years of experience in undercover operations and cybersecurity, Congressman Hurd worked in Congress with a focus on good policy for the American people, having been described as the future of the GOP. Congressman Hurd's seminars will be on Tuesdays from 3 to 4 p.m. Finally, we have Kara Swisher, editor-at-large of New York Magazine and host of the Sway and Pivot podcasts. She has been a leading journalist covering political technologies and technology policy, having hosted high-profile conferences such as All Things Digital, and written various articles and books on the technology sector. Kara Swisher's seminars will be on Fridays from 12 to 1 p.m. We will also be sending a link in the chat to sign up for all of the Fellows' office hours. We are currently at a crucial moment in our nation's history, especially given the events which unfolded last week. This lineup of fellows is uniquely equipped to deal with the current state of affairs in the United States and abroad, with expertise ranging from the booming technology industry, its role in politics, and the regulation that struggles to keep up, to the divisiveness of the domestic political sphere and how to unite a country which has steadily become more and more polarized. This quarter's fellows will provide students insight into the workings of government, the state of politics in Washington, the tools which can help bridge gaps, and what they mean for the future of this nation. I'm also pleased to introduce David Axelrod, the director of the Institute of Politics, host of the Axe Files podcast, and former chief strategist and senior advisor to Barack Obama. He'll be moderating the discussion today with our panel of fellows. So now, please join me in welcoming Tim Alberta, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, Congressman Will Hurd, and Kara Swisher.
Hugo, thank you for that introduction. And thank you to all of you fellows. I told you before, I can't believe our good fortune in having this particular panel of fellows, this particular group at this particular moment in history. And I think at the end of this discussion, our students will understand why. Before we start, I just want to mention that some of the students who are with us may have just come from a memorial service for Year on Fan, who was a student at the University of Chicago who tragically lost his life in the last week in a senseless act of violence, or as part of a series of acts of violence over the course of a bloody rampage this past weekend. And he is in our thoughts. His family is in our thoughts, and we need to note that. There was a national event that was shocking in its own way to most Americans, Tim, but not to you. You've been covering American politics, and you've been doing it, interestingly, from the heartland, from Michigan, for some years. And you've been warning of such a thing, and you've been writing very, very pointedly about it since the election. But talk about why you weren't shocked by it, and where do you think this is going?
Well, David, first, let me just express my gratitude for you all having me, and this is one heck of a group to be a part of. I feel like a thorn among the roses here, so I'll do my best to keep up with the others. And also to the students listening, I'm just I'm heartbroken hearing that about your fellow classmates. So you guys are all in my prayers. I'm really sorry to hear that. Listen, I think what we have to sort of come to terms with is the fact that American politics has always been, in its own way, tribal, and it's always been polarizing, and there's always been deep partisan division in this country dating back to the 18th century, and that's a feature of the system, not a bug. And often it's that very polarization, that very creative tension, if you will, that can produce great results. And I would be remiss to sit here and tell you that what we're seeing in American politics now is in any way sort of in the tradition of that creative tension, because it's not. It's spilled over into something far darker and more sinister and less productive. This is the byproduct, to my mind, of sort of years of diminishing confidence and public faith in American institutions, public and private. And obviously that's what I'm going to be talking about in my seminars. But I think, more specifically over the last 5 years, what we've seen on the American right is a willingness to fall in line behind someone whose sort of very political existence is born out of deception and duplicity and an unwillingness or lack of capacity to tell the truth. And David knows better than anyone, right, that in many ways the inception of Donald Trump's presidential ambitions was his leading role in the birther crusade against Barack Obama, and his willingness to propagate that lie that Barack Obama was not an American citizen. And even during those years, I think those of us who were spending more time covering Republicans, those of us who were spending more time covering conservatives, those of us who were spending more time covering the American right during the Tea Party era, you were beginning to sense that the old Republican Party was sort of being left behind, and that there was something newer and sort of edgier and in many ways sort of less tethered to reality than what maybe the traditional Republican Party had been. And you could point to any number of different things to illustrate that. So without giving a terribly long history of all of that, what I would say, David, is that there were consequences for Donald Trump's campaign of deception against Barack Obama. There were consequences for Donald Trump promising that he would build a wall and have Mexico pay for it, and that he would keep Muslims out of the country. There were consequences for Donald Trump coming into office and almost immediately waging war on the intelligence community and doing things and saying things that we had never seen an American president do before. Now, in many cases, those consequences were favorable to the president. They were favorable to his political brand. They were favorable to him in sort of building this cult following. But I think what we failed to recognize is how dangerous those consequences could become. And ultimately, on November 5th, when President Trump stood at the White House and told the American people that the election had been stolen, that it was all part of a grand conspiracy to cheat him out of office, that their votes had not been counted. I don't know that any of us in that moment could fully appreciate the historical gravity of what was happening. But if you've spent any time around people who are fervent supporters of this president, you knew that a healthy number of them or an unhealthy number of them were going to believe what he said. And you can only sort of take that to its natural, logical conclusion that if enough people believe that an election was stolen and that there is a deep state conspiracy working against the president, not only to remove him from office, but to destroy your way of life, then you're willing to rise up and fight for it. And that's what we saw happen, literally people willing to fight for it.
And you had a really interesting array of interviews that you posted from various people who you spoke to along the way, and it was stunning but they were the reflection of what you're talking about. Kara, I want to ask you,
Sure.
how much responsibility does the tech community bear for this? You know, Tim talked about Trump, but Trump had has used to great effect the platform that social media provided for him. It's been awfully quiet the last few days in
Yeah,
American
it's been
politics
delightful, actually.
without him. How much responsibility do the big tech platforms have, and what does this do to the already boiling debate about Section 230 and how big tech should be treated?
Well, unfortunately, what's happened here because of the situation we find ourselves in with the attack of the Capitol, which sort of takes up attention as it should, is that it's two things. It allowed people what they did in removing Donald Trump off the platform to conflate these issues around censorship, which don't actually exist in this case, with the issues we have about power of big tech. And we need to separate them because they're two separate and different things in this instance. Look, Donald Trump, no compliment to him, but he was the troller in chief. And why wouldn't you take advantage of these platforms if they were doing nothing? Why wouldn't you behave this way? Why wouldn't you try to govern this way, campaign this way, radicalize people towards you this way, get your base going? This was like a gift to Donald Trump. And so ultimately we have to think about tech companies being at the center of this problem. Everyone said, finally, yay, Twitter, for go Jack Dorsey, and got all kinds of compliments. I think the question we need to ask is what took so long? And I think not just that, but that these platforms were designed to facilitate exactly what Donald Trump did. He did not abuse the platform as much as use them in exactly the way they were built, and then did nothing to him. Now, he got special dispensation on Twitter because he was a newsworthy figure. That's the expression they like to use. But as he started to double down and triple down and quadruple down on behavior, they didn't quite know what to do. They found them, it's almost like being with a child that keeps upping the ante, you know, and he is really childish on a lot of these platforms. And then it started to not just get childish, it started to sort of get like fire starter level kind of thing, you know, that Drew Barrymore movie, or that's based on a Stephen King novel. And so what happened is they allowed him to behave like this, and he moved it forward slowly, even though it seemed quickly. And then when they finally got the chance, they were able to shut him down because it crossed this line, which was a super bright line that tech companies, even though they arbitrarily enforce their rules all across their platforms, it just doesn't make any sense. He crossed the line, which is incitement to violence. And there's two things that they just really do crack down on very quickly, which is child pornography and incitement to violence. The problem is they act like it was a surprising thing. This has happened because we are so American and we focus on America all the time. This has been happening already in the Philippines, in India, in Myanmar. Example after example of platforms, most especially Facebook. Let me just say, Twitter gets all the attention because we're all journalists and we're egomaniacs and we love the Twitter and politicians. But let me just tell you, Facebook is the font and center of organization. And all this behavior, whether it's through their WhatsApp app or through the Facebook, the Big Blue app itself. And so one of the things that was really surprising is acting like this is a surprise, because they've had this happen before. It just hasn't it's gotten coverage, but not the notice that pressured them into doing anything about it. The last thing I'd say is I think what you saw at the end was, you know, this is 3 years and 11 months, 15 days, 24 hours into we're about to get to the Biden administration. It took them to this last minute to do something about it. It's because they know what's coming. They know what's going to come now. And at this point, he crossed the line so hard that they had to do something about it instead of using kind of silly tools like putting up labels. Those labels just drove me crazy. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I want to stick with you just because you're going to have to leave a little early. So if you guys will just indulge me for a second, Will and Heidi, what do you think happens now? There was this already, you know, the president himself was stirring a debate about Section 230, the immunity that these platforms have. And there's some agreement on left and right on that. There's also concern, particularly among the left, about just the size of these
That's where the story is. That's where the real point is. This whole 230 debate is, we cannot get rid of 230. It would wreck. I just interviewed the CEO of Substack, which is this promising new platform for publishing newsletters, essentially. And it would kill off Substack. It will kill off the small companies. It will allow Facebook and others to dominate. That's the issue. And what's really problematic is the right wing keeps indulging in ridiculous rhetoric about censorship, or that they're being so abused, evidence-free that they're being abused, or being censored any more than anyone else. They violate rules more than anyone else. That's really the problem that they find themselves in. But if we could just decide that this, and David Cicilline did a great job of this, it's about power. It's about too much power. And that's the problem, is that these companies, Google dominates search 90%, Facebook dominates social media, Amazon has other issues. If we didn't see it as a big tech thing and we dealt with each of them individually, Apple has very different problems than Facebook and others. And so I think what's going to have to happen is really smart bipartisan legislation where we talk about too much power. And we know how to do this. We did it with trains. We did it with oil. We did it with telcos. We know how to do this. We know about market power. If that is changed, and we allow innovation to bubble up and to have, more companies come into fore, we wouldn't have these debates, whether it's about Parler or anybody else. In Parler's case, unfortunately, AWS really put them out of business. The App Store was a problem, but AWS was a real issue. The problem he has in that case, he's arguing antitrust in the case of Amazon. There's 7 providers of cloud services. It is actually a very robust market. But we have to start thinking about the power and marketplace power that these companies have. And if we start to address that, it will deal individually with each company, depending on what company deserves which remedy. That's where we'll be able to fix the problem.
Will, I want to ask you about how what this does to America's standing in the world and how the world is looking at all this. But before we do, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, as someone who left Congress a week ago, how you felt when you saw those images. Those were corridors you walked, chairs you sat in. You could well have been in that room. And explain, a question that people ask is, well, why wouldn't everybody vote to impeach the president? Because he did in fact incite the mob. He pointed them down Pennsylvania Avenue with a raft of incendiary language, knowing who he was talking to. So just give your perspective from your experience and explain that.
Well, there's an image inside on the floor of the House of about 4 plainclothes police officers with their weapons drawn, and there's several of my colleagues kind of in a V shape. To me, that was just a shocking image, and it's hard to, having just left there, it's hard to imagine what was there. I've talked to many of my colleagues. Some of those that were last to leave the floor, they were literally breaking chairs to try to get clubs to makeshift clubs, because they really believed they're going to have a fight to get out of there. And so for the folks that have never experienced something like that, it rattles you. What's even more shocking, in my opinion, than the impeachment vote was the vote that night on certifying the election. The fact that 121 Republicans did not certify the election when that just had happened. And to me, that's even more shocking. And ultimately, it's because some of these folks on the Republican Party are afraid of the far right. They're afraid of the political consequences in the next election in 2 years, in this case. And I think that's what drove some of those decisions, similar decisions when it comes to impeachment. Now, some of the folks there are going to make the argument, a process argument, right? But to me, when it comes to impeachments, there's 535 definitions of what impeachment should be, right? My definition is it's got to be a violation of the law. The reason I didn't vote for impeachment, a year ago, was because there was no evidence of the bribery, right? The other side did not know that there was something to be lost, right? In this case, I could even say the phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State that was trying to get someone to commit fraud, right? I'm not a lawyer, I'm a computer scientist. That's a violation of the law. And literally not just President Trump, at the end of a number of speakers, I'm telling these folks to go down and march. And you don't have to listen to their words. Listen to the words of the people that were there. So, a lot of conservatives want to say, "Oh, this was Antifa." No, these guys that did it had said, "We're not Antifa. We're for the president." So to me, that was clear. And I'm glad there was at least 10 of my former colleagues that made that decision. But the
let me interrupt for a second. What happens to Liz Cheney now? She's number 3 member of the Republican caucus. There's a move to remove her from that position. Will she survive that?
I think she will. I think she will when this is all said and done. The fact that some of the far right guys, when I first came into Congress, are now chairman or ranking members is pretty shocking to me. But the part that's scary, there's a handful of members that actually believe some of this stuff. Right? And I actually, they actually truly believe this. But the rest are the ones that don't believe it and go on because it's politically expedient. And that's scary, because ultimately it goes down to electoral politics, and they're going to have to run an election in 2 more years. But we're operating in, the question is, those people that tried to overthrow the government, they were believing the disinformation and misinformation that they had been sending. They were believing these lies, and these lies have been set up for 4 years. And we know what radicalization looks like, right? We know what that process is. We know what tools are being used, and we never expected this was going to impact us. And it has. And you started the question with, how does this impact us overseas?
Yeah.
The fact that the dictator of Venezuela and the president of Turkey are basically commenting like, we encourage everybody to come to the table, right? Is pretty shocking. The fact, the Chinese language press in China were actually being pretty accurate about what was going on all day, and they were constantly telling their audience, this is not Mogadishu in 1993. This is not Afghanistan. This is not Iraq. This is the United States of America. And we know the Russians are trying to leverage that to further erode trust with our allies in America's ability to operate. So we don't operate in a vacuum. These points that Kara outlined, we have to deal with, because guess what? We need these American companies to work with the public sector, because we are in a competition with the government of China on global leadership in advanced technology. And you can't defeat a government that can move all of its factors of production into one direction without having all of our side together. So if we can't come to some of these basic and answer some of these basic questions, we are at a point where we may not be able to drive international leadership on these topics. And so all of this is interconnected, and it's going to affect our way of life.
Well, it strikes me that Kara was making what once would have been considered a Republican argument, which is that competition is good.
Well, not just that. May I just say, because I do have to go in a minute, is that what's really fascinating is the idea that a lot of the Republicans are putting forward, which was really interesting, of like, we've got to make them do this. They've got to be forced to do this. One of the things they're businesses that don't want to be in the terrorism business. They just don't want to be in the terrorism business, and they should be allowed not to be if they want to opt out of it. The problem is they're also the biggest and the only, and so that's a very separate thing. And the last thing is what Tim was talking about with China. I've been writing about the Chinese threat for a long, long time. This issues around China and dominating the next internet age. that still does not give someone like Mark Zuckerberg the excuse to use the she or me defense, right? That's what he does. He did it to me 2 years ago in an interview. Like, if you don't let me be big, China's going to take over. And he goes, that's a really hard choice. I said, I don't want either of you. Like, both. No, it's she or me, not you, not she. I don't like she more, but you're not so pretty at the same time. And so one of the things that's really important is to think about what is the way innovation works is it bubbles from the bottom. The reason China will never be able to overcome us if we do it right is because it's a top-down innovation situation. That's changed in China. There's a lot of amazing companies bubbling up from the bottom, and the government's letting it, but still has massive control. And so the way we do this is we create a vibrant tech community here where it was invented. If we allow them to be these big companies that are helping us fight China, and they can only do it because they're big, it's a losing argument on lots of levels.
Heidi and Cara, I know you have a family obligation, so feel free to go. We are so pleased you're here and look forward to a lot of rich conversations in the next 8 weeks. So great to have you, and good luck to your son. Heidi, good to see you. In a way, you may also have been unsurprised by some of these events. Because there is such, because you live in a place, you used to, North Carolina, I remember when it was the font of Democratic senators and congressmen, and Democratic Party had great strength there. You may be the last of a breed there, having one in North Dakota. But tell me what you were hearing from your neighbors. Tell me what you saw, and were you surprised by what you saw last week? I know you were shocked, appalled in some ways, but were you surprised?
No, I mean, I think anyone who says they're surprised hasn't been paying attention, and they haven't lived understanding that right-wing extremist groups have been with us forever. I mean, let's just start at the beginning. The Know Nothings, the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, we could just go through a long historical rendition of groups that have been in the shadows and occasionally achieve a certain level of political power and then recede to the shadows as it becomes politically unpopular. And so when you look at it, I mean, my history, it's interesting. My history with right-wing extremist groups really was born out of my work as a tax commissioner. North Dakota was the hotbed of the Posse Comitatus. Posse Comitatus was a right-wing group that didn't believe that the government had the right to tax anyone. And it ended up in a shootout that was pretty notorious, where a U.S. Marshal was killed in North Dakota, and a lot of books written about the Posse and about, kind of tax protesters as they were known at the time. But you think about Ruby Ridge, you think about what happened in Waco. I mean, we're all like now we look at this segment of time and think that this is all we need to understand, but we've got to go back in history and understand that what has driven our movement towards the arc of equality has really been calling out politically on both sides of the aisle extremist groups, especially in this case, right-wing extremist groups, and not inviting them to the party. So enter Donald Trump. And immediately the call and response that he used, I mean, David, you've been a political operative. He had the largest focus groups in the history of the world. He would go down, test a message, and he would listen to the response he got, whether it was build the wall, Mexico will pay for it, lock her up. And the louder the response, the more he repeated that pledge. And the more he repeated the pledge, the more it emboldened these right-wing groups that have been in the shadows and tracked by people like the Anti-Defamation League, tracked by the FBI, tracked by local and state organizations, the more they felt emboldened. And so my particular interest isn't in trying to understand them. I think I understand them. They want power. They don't like the cultural changes. They walk around with jackets on that symbolize 6 million wasn't enough. they are reprehensible, and everybody agrees they're reprehensible. But why have we now seen a louder, this is a core of corruption, but now it has spread out, and it particularly has taken seed in rural America. And that's the thing that I'm trying to better understand. So if you took Donald Trump as a character and you brought him to a coffee table in my hometown, Manador, North Dakota, he started bragging about how much money he had. He started telling a bunch of lies about how important he was. He started doing all these behaviors. They wouldn't invite him back to have coffee with them, or they would marginalize him. But yet, as a collective group, getting outside of the one-on-one, they have bought into this persona. They have bought into this this belief that Donald Trump is somehow the best president of their lifetime, that he speaks to them, that he is their champion against all odds. I mean, we heard, and I believe it, that he didn't like the people who went to the Capitol because they seemed low class. And that's not who he wants to be around, right? So what I've spent a lot of time thinking about, certainly since the challenges that I've had electorally, is how is it that these people that I thought I knew, people who work hard, who, yes, they're conservative, but they are also honest, hardworking, don't want to tell a lie, their handshake is their bond. How did they buy into this person and now become part of that circle of influence that has become the Trump 74 million voters? And why is it that rural America has been particularly susceptible? And that's what I hope to explore with students, to introduce them to some folks from rural America, but also to have a really honest confrontation with who we are, because I will tell you honestly, who I thought rural America is and was is not what I'm seeing right now. And why there isn't more pushback against this is hard to imagine, and it has polarized my communities. There are fewer people, but literally Facebook community and neighborhood Facebook pages that have taken on a tone that is just not consistent with what you would expect to see in rural America or in North Dakota. And so we have to do some soul searching in this country. And Donald Trump, in my opinion, he's not the vanguard, he's the symptom.
Let me I want to ask you one more question, then I want to get to the questions from students. Joe Biden becomes president next, your former colleague becomes president on the 20th. He will inherit this situation, not just the virus, not just the COVID virus, but this virus. What would you advise him about how to defuse some of this? Do you have advice for him?
Yeah. I have really clear advice. Get out of Washington, D.C. He fashions himself, and I love Joe, and you love Joe. We know him. All of us know him. And he thinks he's a deal maker. He has, I mean, it's been now 10 years since he's been in the Senate. It's a completely different place. They don't want to do deals. They want to placate their base. They want to get political power. And the only place where you can really heal a nation is when you go to the nation. Not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And so, the Iowa State Fair, go and make a speech about how you care about rural America. Come when there's a flood in Grand Forks, come in as Bill Clinton did, and tell people I'm here to help. There's 100 ways that they can reach out and send the message that we hear you, we know you. We used to laugh at Bill Clinton because he felt their pain. He did feel their pain, and they knew it, and he had that empathy. And that's what Joe Biden has that Donald Trump never had, the ability to connect one-on-one. And I know he can do it, but he can't do it from Washington, D.C. He's got to get out in the hinterlands.
You had your hand up there, I thought.
Yeah, look, two points that Heidi inspired from me. I grew up in San Antonio, but I represent a very rural part of Texas, 820 miles of the border. It takes 10 and a half hours to drive across my district. A third of it doesn't have cell phone coverage. And her points about if Donald Trump had showed up in these communities, they would never let him come back. And when he made when the Billy Bush tapes came out and they talked about grab them by the sensitive parts, I was horrified. And I was one of 3 elected Republicans in Texas that denounced that. And because I was like, I don't want I'm a bachelor, I don't have kids, but like I don't want my niece growing up to marry someone like him or my nephew growing up to be like him. And I had a friend who called me that was from West Texas, a young mother. She's like, why are you getting all worked up? That's how all of y'all talk. And I was just like horrified. I was like, look, that's not how I talk. But that was an example of how a community that has certain values that were fine with someone who they ended up, waving the flag for to have that to happen. And so that's wild. And the one thing, if Joe Biden can change for across the United States of America, unified government is not the way to solve our problems. This started at the end of Bush, and we've seen this. Nothing big that has ever stayed and fixed this country has ever been done with one party alone. And I think he's going to get pushed by his far left to do some things that the far left would like to see. And if he tries to do what 80% of Americans want to get done early on, he's going to catch a lot of blowback. But I think he's one of the guys that could potentially pull that off.
Hey, David, can I for 30 seconds, just, I want to, because this is really important to both what the senator and the congressman said. When communities, especially small, rural, working class or poor communities, when they lose their confidence that in the government and in civic society, and they come to believe that none of these institutions, and again, I'm just going to be a broken record on this, but when none of these institutions are sort of working for them anymore, they're willing suddenly to take a leap on things that they otherwise never would have taken a leap on, right? And like this in many ways helps to explain Trumpism's very odd and a somewhat counterintuitive appeal in parts of the country where they are exactly right. If Donald Trump came into my hometown that I grew up in small town Michigan, same thing. They'd toss his ass out of the diner and they'd say, never come back here. We don't want you around here. And yet now they are drawn to him. Why? It's because they don't believe in their local church anymore. They don't believe in corporate America. They think Wall Street has it out for them. They don't trust any politicians. They don't trust Major League Baseball anymore, right? Like they don't trust anything. And people are inherently, I think, at least the way I view the world, like people inherently want to trust. They want to believe in something. They want to follow something. And when you've seen this erosion of confidence across the board and all of these other things that they used to trust, suddenly they're sort of desperate and they're looking around, and along comes this guy who says, I can fix all your problems. I mean, he literally said that, right, during the campaign. Trust me, I alone can fix it. And I think a huge number of people were willing to just go along with it and say, you know what, everything else has failed us up until this point. What do we have to lose? What could go wrong?
And if I could just add one thing, and he was funny, and going to his rallies was fun.
Yeah,
it's like tailgating. Literally, it's like tailgating, and hanging out with your best pal.
I would add to that authenticity, even if you're faking it, is valuable in politics. And the fact that he was politically incorrect. I mean, yes, there were loud, sort of racist bullhorns and all of that stuff, but generally, he didn't sound like a politician. And that profited him as well. I got to get to these questions. Rodrigo, step up and ask yours.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for sharing your insights and reflections on this moment. My name is Rodrigo Estrada. I'm a fourth-year student in the college. And as an aspiring public servant who will be graduating soon and working in DC, I was very disheartened by what I saw, especially staffers who were cowering under their desks. who were just the beginning of their careers. Soon after those attacks, many were quick to call for unity without offering any specifics. I'm curious, what does unity mean to you, or to Congressman Will Hurd, to your point? Is it a worthwhile endeavor? Is it something realistic in this hyper partisan age in which we live? Thank you.
Great.
Rodrigo, I'll take that. I'll take the first crack at that. Absolutely, it's a worthwhile endeavor, and it's possible. So I was in Congress for 6 years, got 20 pieces of legislation signed into law under a Republican president, under a Democratic president, under a Republican speaker, under a Democratic speaker. And guess what? You know, I was honest. When you represent a 50-50 district, no matter what you do, half the district's upset with you. But you know what I did? I showed up, I listened, I solved problems. So a lot of times people will be like, Hurd, you gotta agree with the president more, but thanks for fixing that thing, right? And so yes, that's the only way we're gonna solve these big challenges. And we have to, because we are in a war. Like, we are literally, the future of our economy, the future of our way of life is being challenged. And we have to get these things right here at home, and we actually agree on more than what we disagree. And so we have to do it, right? I'm a firm believer in that, and I've proven it time and time again. It's hard, it's really hard, but we need young folks like you, Rodrigo, that are going to go up to Washington, D.C. and raise your hand and be like, you know, why don't we actually do something with somebody on the other side and be the example?
Yeah. I want to get to Charlie. I'd only say parenthetically, and use the advantage of the chair here, that the incentive system is out of whack here. You're not incentivized to do what you're saying, Will, and to the extent you did it, that you deserve credit for it. Heidi, you as well, but you don't get rewarded for it necessarily in our politics, and I think that's something we have to have more discussion for. Charlie, why don't you step up and ask your question?
Hello, I'm Charlie Gadsden, a freshman at the college. My question is, with these big tech algorithms being built in ways that put users into political echo chambers, and with the shutdowns in open discourse due to increased political polarization, these extremist groups are bound to keep growing and keep forming. How do we, from a political standpoint and from a societal standpoint, attempt to overcome this increasing political division and lack of discourse so that these extremist groups don't continue to grow?
Heidi, you want to take a whack at that?
Well, I'll just toss this over to Will, because he's the expert here. But my husband's a woodworker. He's way more liberal than I am. Believes in single payer, healthcare. He's a physician. But as a woodworker, he gets every right-wing crazy, ad when he goes out on YouTube. So clearly they've decided that woodworkers, that guys who do that kind of work, really want to hear these right-wing messages, and it drives them crazy. So Will, why is it that the algorithms target my husband?
Well, because he's clicking on that stuff, right?
Well, he's not clicking on it. He's just trying to watch the video on how to fix the faucet.
Right, and look at what we have to do is it starts with individual behavior, right? And there's two great documentaries out that everybody should watch. Was it social disinformation?
Dilemma, right?
Social dilemma about how the system of design is excellent, and then After Truth. Our fellow Cara is involved in this, and when they talk about disinformation, as responsible citizens, we have to start evaluating the things that we do online. Why are we sharing something? There's been a number of studies that have shown that people literally know that they're sharing garbage, but they do it anyways, right? And so individuals have a responsibility to do that. Then we need to be able to find people like Tim Alberta, right, who are truly a person that we can go to say, hey, separate fact for fiction. for us. And you need more of those Walter Cronkite type folks that are being objective in sharing this information. And then we have to design these systems in such a way that you prevent, right, the ability for something to become really sticky. We know how that algorithm works. And if it's leading to negative consequences, we need to rethink that. But that's going to require Congress and state legislatures to act on saying this is the type of things that we need to be seeing. And if that doesn't happen, which it hasn't happened to this date, you have to have these companies with terms of service that are focused on how their tools should be used.
It is troubling. Heidi's story is troubling and familiar, because there are presumptions that the algorithms make that if you do certain things, if you are interested in certain things, then this is, I know a lot about this. Anybody who's been involved in politics knows a lot about this. Presumptions are made about your political inclinations based on, cultural factors. And so that, it's intrusive, but it also leads to this siloing that is really, really dangerous. Let me see who's next up here. I think Adam.
I thank you all so much for this opportunity and for speaking today. My name is Adam Zabner. I'm a third-year neuroscience major in the college, but I've spent most of the last year and a half out of school working on a couple of Democratic campaigns. In the last 2 months working for the Ossoff campaign in Georgia. I'm wondering whether you think Senate Republicans would be so willing to distance themselves from the president if Leffler and Perdue had won. And I guess my question is, are they really worried about what's happening, or do they just think that siding with Trump has become a losing ticket?
I mean, I can take that. Adam, it's a really good question. And the counterfactual there is not entirely knowable, but I found myself asking the same thing on an election night and in the days that followed, because, and really, frankly, I've also been thinking about it post January 6th. I had, let's see, so I think it was Saturday or Sunday, but it was over the weekend. And typically pollsters don't usually go in over the weekend into the field with big surveys, but a couple of Republican pollsters I know were really eager and felt some urgency to go into the field following the events of January 6th and see what they could find for some of their high profile clients. And in separate conversations, a couple of the best Republican pollsters in the business, people who I trust, who have given me good information over the years, told me that they saw virtually no movement in the field as far as approval, disapproval of the president, that if anything, it was just at the margins. So that being said, even before the events of the 6th, I didn't personally see that there was I didn't see any sort of jailbreak in the party away from Trump. In other words, yes, he lost the House in 18. Yes, he lost the presidency and then the Senate in 20. And yet he won, over 74 million votes, and he's got, 85 to 90% approval consistently among self-identified Republicans. And so because of what Congressman Hurd had said earlier about just this fear that so many members of Congress have, and not just members of Congress, but local officials as well, which I think is just as important. Your local, your state reps, your state senators, your mayors, your city council members, anybody with an R next to their name on the ballot, they recognize that Trump's base is judging them in large part on their own sort of loyalty or lack thereof to the president. And so once he leaves office, could that begin to change? Probably, but I'll tell you without betraying confidence or giving away this story here, I'm in the middle of publishing one of the bigger profiles of my life right now. It'll be out in a few weeks with a very prominent 2024 Republican. And this person, I've watched them up close now for a year, walking this impossible tightrope as it pertains to the president. And this person's reaction was no different after the Georgia Senate losses. Their reaction was only a little bit different after the storming of the Capitol, and even then they were hedging their bets, Adam. So I think your question is a good one, but even in the light of those losses, I don't see the sort of jailbreak getting away from Trump the way that some of us may have anticipated.
You don't even
And
want
David, I gotta add.
I would just want to ask before you do, Will, you don't even want to give us the initials of your subject?
No, that would give, listen, I will still be a fellow when this thing publishes. So you guys want the first crack at me, but for the time being, I'm keeping it close to the vest.
Okay, Will, I'm sorry.
Look, to Tim's point, here's what doesn't make sense to me. And look, I'm a values-based person. Okay, we should be doing things based on our values, and I agree with Tim that most people want to believe in something larger than themselves. And if you give people something larger than themselves to believe in, that's how you start a movement. However, let's get to the nuts and bolts of campaigning. Donald Trump lost. He was an anchor around everybody's neck. I think it was only in Montana did candidates underperform Donald Trump. Everywhere else, they overperformed him. Oh, and by the way, imagine if the 2020 election, voters didn't think Republicans didn't care about COVID-19. If we were seen as a party that cared about COVID-19, we would have taken the House back. And guess what? Y'all in Georgia learned the lesson between the first race and the runoff race and changed the tactics to drive people to the votes, to the polls. And so to me, it's we lost because of him. And why people are afraid? Because they're lazy. And the primary, it comes down to, I know how to talk to four Republican primary voters. It's real easy. And that's all that they care about, because trying to change the nature of a primary voter is hard. And so they're lazy. So they're staying with this because we all know, and Adam, you know this, not only because you're a neuroscientist, but you were on the ground. The best indicator of future behavior is previous behavior. And you go and you talk to the people that have already voted. And that's ultimately why I think these people are doing it. But I think it's short-sighted, and it's going to hurt us, continue to hurt us electorally.
So let me just say that in partial answer your question. As of today, polling today, Donald Trump has a 73% approval rating among Republicans. It's lower than it was before the insurrection at the Capitol, but that's still pretty high. And those who are devoted to him are very devoted to him. So,
but David, I want to point out, is it lower because of the insurrection, or is it lower because he didn't do enough to pull the Georgia senators forward?
Yeah,
that's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, I think for the politicians, the Georgia issue may be more concerning because that goes to their own well-being. To voters, it may be something different. But my only point, Heidi, is there's potency there still with the Republican electorate.
And Adam, half of the Senate Republican caucus gets up, puts on their shaving cream, and sees a president in the mirror. And they're trying to figure out how they're going to find their space. And the most interesting character in all of this is Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton saw the other two run to the president, defend him, and he won the lottery during the insurrection. He won the lottery because those guys fell off, and now he's the front runner. And Rubio, and I don't know who you're positioning, but Rubio is trying to figure out where he's going to go. This is a snake pit, and I would tell you the Georgia election gives them a chance to play the minority card that I'm fighting without the responsibility of leadership. And so almost being in the minority for someone who plans on running in 4 years is a better position than being responsible for governing.
I want to try and get two questions in here quickly. Lena, why don't you step up here?
Hi, everyone. My name's Lena, and I've talked to some of you because I've been to Heidi's seminars so far, but I'm excited for the rest of yours. But currently, I'm a second year in the college. What I'm studying is completely uncertain, but I do like spending time with the IOP. But my question for y'all today is, right now we're talking a lot about the systems and they're already in the traditional structures of government. There's a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of kind of detachment, especially with communities of color. And I was wondering, how do you all reimagine building this kind of trust, mutual aid, safety outside of the traditional political systems and structures that we live in now, especially thinking about what happened in the Capitol and how the differences of what we saw this summer and what we saw last Wednesday. Thanks.
I can just offer a quick, I mean, I'm not the politician in the group, obviously, but I could offer just like a quick diagnosis from where I sit, Lena. You know, I said to another potential 2024 Republican last week after the events at the Capitol, I said, you know, if you just ran a campaign for president with the tagline, "I swear to God, I'll never lie to you," you probably wouldn't win the primary and you probably wouldn't win the presidency, but you might actually inspire some people and do a lot of good for the country. There are so many people in this country, and particularly on the right, who have been systematically lied to for so long. And I just like, I can't emphasize this enough that, you know, whether it's being told that Obama was born in Kenya, whether it's being told that you could balance the budget magically when you don't have control of the presidency, whether it's being told that your politicians are going to repeal and replace Obamacare, whether it's being, you know, when you can't do it, whether it's being told that Mexico is going to build a wall, whether it's being told that, you know, they're going to keep all the Muslims out, like whether it's being told that the election was stolen, these lies have consequences. And I think at just a foundational level, like, I know that your question is transcending politics, and that's, I want to get to that in the second part of my little homily here. But I think first and foremost, it's like really incumbent on politicians to stop lying. It's really incumbent on tech companies and on journalism entities to stop lying. Fox News is one of the worst things that's ever happened to this country, right? It just as, and I sat with a member of the US Senate, former colleague of yours, Heidi, a few years ago, who swore me to a blood oath that until he's dead, I can never use this quote with his name attached to it. But he told me, he said, Fox News is not only the bane of our existence, but it is the worst thing that's ever happened to the United States of America. And like, that might sound hyperbolic until you realize that millions of people every single night, one of your colleagues, Lena, earlier, classmates, asked about the echo chambers. You have millions of people every night locked in that echo chamber, listening to things that just are not true. And it's impossible to quantify how those lies compound over time. So, and the second thing I would say very briefly is, once we can start getting people to tell the truth again and work from a legitimate, honest baseline of information, which I think is the biggest struggle we have in society today, that we're not operating from a shared baseline of honest information, that people are drawing different conclusions, not on the same set of facts, but on different set of facts. And that's just hugely problematic. I think the other thing is, to your point, this has to exist outside of politics. We shouldn't have politicians dominating our lives the way that they are right now. It's cool to see people as engaged as they are with these campaigns, but it's also a little bit like troubling to me. Like, civic society has to be rebuilt. Like, communities have to be rebuilt. I wrote about this about a year ago. I went to this big gun show in mid-Michigan, and like, probably 4 out of 5 people who I met there and who I spent the day talking with, they weren't there to buy guns. They were just there for the community. They were there to hang out with people. They were there to talk. They were there, and a lot of what they were talking about was Trump. I wrote this line in the piece about how there was more Trump stuff for sale at the gun show than there were guns for sale. And it was telling us something, right? That like, this hollowing out of American communities, particularly small towns, it has real implications for the way that we live our lives and the way that we vote and everything else. And so until we can start to rebuild some of those communities and that civic society and that trust in civic society, I think that we're going to continue in this sort of downward spiral that we've been in.
We have 2 quick questions. I know, Will, you have to run. And Heidi, you probably do as well. Let us, because I don't, having listened to your homily, Tim, I don't want to be made a liar of. I want to make sure we get all these questions in. Jake, why don't you go real quick, and we'll ask for lightning round answers. And then who else? Andrew just disappeared. Andrew's still there. Go ahead, go ahead, Jake.
Thank you. And this has just been extraordinary. I've learned so much already. So I'm Jay Kaplan. I'm a evening master's program student in Harris, and I was just curious to hear about where you think the post-Trump world goes from here, especially in the Republican Party, seeing folks like Congressman Gates saying, you know, Liz Cheney is going to lose all her support. We should remove her from leadership. And then you have Congressman Meyer, who showed a lot of courage to me in voting for impeachment, saying, no, she's got support. And is the party going to drift to Jordan and Gates, or is it going to stay with Cheney and see a different direction post-Trump? I don't know what that's going to look like. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And again, thank you for your time on this. It's been wonderful.
Well, Jake, before Tim Alberta tells me I'm wrong, because I'll come in first. I think you have that backwards. I think it's going to shift from the Gates and the Jordan to the Cheney and the Peter Meyer and the John Katko. You know, and part of that is I have to believe that, because we should all care. Because the reason this country has become great is through the competition of ideas. And the only way you have a competition of ideas is if you have two parties that are able to function and focus on those ideas. And so while to Lena's point and to piggyback on Tim's homily, we have to make sure that people are doing things because they're the right thing to do, not because it gets you clicks, not because, you know, it boosts your social media profile. My social media profile would be 10x of what it is now if I said crazy things, okay? But I don't say crazy things. And so to me, I think this is the debate and the fight that we're going to have in the Republican Party. You're going to see people coming about how do you get your hands dirty in primaries. And before everybody try to not play in primaries, I think you're going to see a lot more of this happen in Republican primaries in 2022. Sorry, that wasn't lightning round, David.
Yeah.
No, that's okay.
Jake, I want to respond. Jake, I'll talk to you about this in 3 weeks. One of the problems that we have right now in political discourse is we want the 24-hour, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. Guess what? A lot of things are going to turn in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. And Will knows this, and I know this because we've both been involved in law enforcement. We don't know the full story. But think about this. What does Liz Cheney know? Her father led a letter asking secretaries of defense to warn the Pentagon to honor the Constitution. What was going on in the Pentagon? What does Liz Cheney know was going on? What are we going to find out about this insurrection? And so it's really, I mean, there's always that interest in what's going to happen tomorrow. And it's really important. And one of the is to not buy into that immediacy and to let things play out, to bring more information to the front. And so I think if there's one thing I would like to see beyond telling the truth, as Will talked about, I'd like to see people just hold their horses and figure out a little bit more and not buy into the, you've got to respond today or you'll be irrelevant. Let's find out what really happened. And I think Liz Cheney is going to look like she was a genius when this is all said and done.
Jake, I can answer real fast. I know that Matt Gaetz is Will's best friend, so I don't want to drive a wedge between those two. But just to be clear for any students watching, that is a joke.
That's not true.
There are few members of Congress who I've ever respected more than Will Hurd, and few who I've ever respected less than Matt Gaetz, and the two don't even belong in the same sentence together. Listen, history is cyclical. David can give you chapter and verse on that. Party history is cyclical. You know, Paul Ryan, in the epilogue of my book that's over my shoulder over here, shamelessly promoting it, but Paul Ryan said, you know, the Reagan wing beat the Rockefeller wing, and then the Trump wing beat the Reagan wing. So the question moving forward is, you know, is there a Hurd wing? Is there a, you know, I'm trying to think of like who could lead a potential sort of center-right, rational Republican retakeover of the party. I think it's possible, but I will touch on two things that Will and Heidi said. And sorry that I'm dropping your honorifics there, but first, it's the primary subculture of the Republican Party. As Will said, man, look, in general elections, you get 50, 60, 65% turnout. In primary elections, you get 8, 10, 12% turnout. Who are the people that are turning out? You know who they are in these primaries, right? And so until that incentive structure that David was referencing, until it kind of untangles itself, and that's through not only gerrymandering, but through geographic self-selection. And that gets to Heidi's point. Why is her husband seeing all these ads? It's because the algorithms are targeting the zip code in North Dakota where people drink Budweiser and watch reruns of Cheers, that they're going to target her with certain political advertisements, right? Like that's a lot of this is all sort of interconnected. Right. So I want to believe that the Republican Party can sort of get its head back on straight, Jake, but I don't think that's going to happen real quickly. I actually think it could take a very long time for the party to turn the page on Trumpism because of some of those incentive structures that exist right now.
All right, we were miserably, all good points, we were miserably failing in terms of the lightning round stuff. But Andrew, I feel obligated to let you have your say here, and you'll be the last question.
Thank you. So I'm Andrew Doty, a second-year Master of Public Policy at Harris. My question is, it's a two-parter, but a simple one. On a scale from 1 to 5, to what extent do you think America is in danger of severe democratic deconsolidation, a la Turkey, Russia? And part B, what % of Americans do you think agree with the number you gave?
All right, now that's a lightning round question right there. Let's see what discipline you guys have.
Is 5 the democracy's in peril? That's the ranking?
Maximum peril.
Maximum peril, I would say before the election 5, after the election 4, and I believe 2 would be the percentage, the number that certainly the citizens of my state would give it.
2.5 and 80.
I'd say 4.5, and maybe 10% of people believe that. And the 4.5 is because if this wasn't spread out over 4 states, if this was just a single state, if this was Bush, Gore, 2000 all over again, I actually think that the president and his party would have figured out a way to flip the result, and there's nothing that would have stopped them. And for that reason, I'm glad that this was spread out over 4 states, and that because it was spread out, because it was a sort of decentralized crisis, that you had individual legislatures and individual courts and individual canvassers, statewide boards of canvassers that were able to hold the line in different places. But if it was it's almost like a siege that was, instead of it being them battering down one door, they had to spread themselves all the way out. And for that reason, it failed. But if it had been more concentrated, I think it would have succeeded.
Yeah, and David, I know this is lightning round, but Andrew, that question was polled on, I believe yesterday. I forget the organization, but basically 82% of the country believes the country is on the wrong track. And the number is very equal between Republicans and Democrats. Yeah, and so it's bad. But I think we're constantly, I say 2.5, because we're always in this point of peril, right? And we can always go either in either direction.
I honestly think that never before in my lifetime have I thought that autocracy could win. Never. Now, even Bush v. Gore. And I believe autocracy almost won. And never forget that.
Since I'm the moderator, I will be moderate and say that I will say 3.5 and 50%. But the reality is our institutions, our democratic institutions, were just stress tested in a really profound way. And the weaknesses were very clear. And we survived because our institutions were strong enough. But we survived also because people of goodwill did their duty as they saw it. And as the others have pointed out, if that had not been the case, we could have seen a really, really dramatically bad result. in terms of the integrity of this election. There's so much to talk about. This was a teaser. This was an appetizer. We have the greatest group of fellows ever, and the most timely group of fellows. And the fellows program only works because of the willingness of really, really good people, practitioners with deep insights who are willing to share their time with us. So I'm so grateful to all you guys and really looking forward to this quarter. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
We'll see you guys.
Bye,
Go to
guys.
seminars.
Thanks, David.
We'll see you.
See you guys.